I could read you Alex Newman's CV, but then we wouldn't have any time left for the interview. So we'll just suffice it to say that he is an international journalist, educator, author, speaker, syndicated radio show host, consultant, and I would add world traveler to the list. Alex Newman, welcome back to The Truth.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So you just got back from the UN COP30. That's an acronym for something, although I don't know what it is.
Yeah, the UN loves acronyms. I think they deliberately try to make everything as confusing as possible. The COP30 just means 30th Conference of the Parties. And basically in 1992, they got together in Rio de Janeiro, created the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is also confusing, the UNFCCC, because it's both an agreement and a bureaucracy. So you have the treaty, and then you have a bureaucracy by the same name that organizes these conferences every year and basically adds a new addendum onto the underlying treaty each year.
Well, so it was held in Brazil, and it could have been the COP31, I guess, but the United States evidently was excluded from participating, although you got to attend as a journalist. What you observed and what conclusions you brought back home.
So the Trump administration actually sent us a note. They said they refused to participate in this thing. They said the goal of the conference was to bankrupt the United States, and so we did not authorize any U.S. representatives to go down there, which was fun. This is the first time the U.S. has not been represented there. The downside of that is that a lot of the globalists thought it was fun, too. You had Christiana Figueres, the former executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN climate bureaucracy, saying, oh, this is great that America is not here because then we can pass whatever we want and it'll be binding on them in 3.5 years when Trump leaves. One of the top bigwigs at the Center for Biological Diversity made the same argument that, hey, as long as they're not here, let's do a really ambitious deal. And then once Trump is gone, we'll just make them obey it anyway. So Trump still has a Trump card. He could pull us out of the UNFCCC, which I know some of his advisors are urging him to do. But it was a very surreal conference, and there was a few big takeaways for me. The first one was the final agreement. Obviously, they got a reference in there to the carbon budget that humanity has, and apparently we've already burned through 4/5 of it. And because the United States has already emitted more than its fair share of CO2, what's left now needs to be allocated to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, India, Brazil, South Africa, et cetera. And so we need to start dismantling what's left of our productive capacity and ship it all to those places. So that was a big one. They got a side agreement, a bunch of U.S. allies, on censoring our speech on the internet. They call it information integrity. But for me, one of the really significant stories that didn't get almost any attention was how this conference just really showed you blatantly that what they're doing here is they're trying to repaganize the world. They're trying to demolish what's left of Christian civilization, of Christendom, what we used to call the free world during the Cold War, and basically move us toward a one world order based on a radically new set of principles and new ethics, where man is not kind of made in the image of God with these unalienable rights, and the purpose of government is to protect those rights. In the new vision, you are a cog in a machine. Your life is no more valuable than a cockroach. We need to say constant prayers to the river spirits and the forest spirits and the rock spirits and placate the angry climate deities with carbon credits. It all sounds very strange, but I assure you this was out in the open throughout this UN summit. So
it's just mind-boggling, and I think you touched on it, but climate, the world, according to the climate change believers, it used to be global warming, as I recall. We only had 10 years left before the world was going to disintegrate and turn into a ball of fire. And I think that was 30 years ago, but somehow we still seem to be managing. Is climate change just a hoax? Is it one big hoax? And if so, what's the end game? What are we being tricked into doing?
It is definitely a hoax, but I'd say it's more than a hoax. It's the hoax. It is the fraud that is being used to justify basically the entire globalist agenda. It's a global problem, therefore it requires global solutions, and only the UN can bring us global solutions, right? So it is the pretext for creating a one-world political, economic, and religious system that is going to be totalitarian at its core, pagan or pantheistic in nature, and the American people, I think, don't think about this much anymore because they don't hear much about the climate fraud in the media because they know that we don't believe it. But for the rest of the world, the UN climate fraud is literally the most important hoax that they are running right now. And they made very clear that they'll be brainwashing our children. So they know they're not going to get the American adults, but that's okay because they're going to have the next generation totally indoctrinated into this foolishness. But yes, the pseudoscience behind it is blatantly fraudulent. Their argument, essentially, for those who haven't followed this closely, is that the gas we exhale, carbon dioxide, every human activity releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's called the gas of life by credible scientists. The planet is starving for CO2. Plants, Dr. William Happer, Trump's climate advisor during his first term, explained to me, are designed to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2. That's why farmers pump it into their greenhouses, of course. And so from a scientific perspective, this is a wonderful gas. People should be encouraged to make more of it. But from the UN's pseudoscientific perspective, this gas is dangerous, toxic pollution and is driving climate change. And only a tax by the UN, only control by the UN can save us from this alleged scourge. And because everything releases CO2 emissions, agriculture, for example, makes up 30% of emissions. Shipping is 3%. Transportation, energy, building, anything you do involves CO2 emissions. Then everything then comes under the control of the would-be saviors of the climate. So it's a significant fraud. In fact, it's, I would argue, one of the most significant frauds right now. And Americans had better get a hold of this and a handle on this, because if we don't, it is going to be the excuse that ends up enslaving our children and our grandchildren.
Well, I really kind of thought the movement was dead, to tell you the truth. I mean, Trump won the presidency by a record margin. And one of the things that he continually harped on was how the climate change was a hoax. And then you had Bill Gates, excuse me, come out and say that he thought that there was more than climate change to worry about, namely poverty and disease, and that he thought they should be treated somewhat equally in our response. And a lot of people consider that to be a major shift away from climate change by Gates. Your thoughts?
It was definitely a major shift away from the climate hoax by Bill Gates, but this really didn't have anything to do with suddenly gaining a brain or a conscience and saying, maybe this isn't what we need to be doing. I think the answer is actually very simple. Bill Gates is dedicated to stealing our freedom and building up global totalitarianism. And he is looking out at this and figuring, hey, I'm better off with AI to enslave humanity than with the climate hoax for now. And AI needs a lot of energy. So let's put the climate hoax on the back burner for the moment. And if you read this, he's still very concerned about climate change. He just thinks there are other concerns that are more important, like maybe poverty. And so I think Bill Gates is looking at the Trump administration and saying, the president says it's the biggest hoax of all time. I don't want to burn all my bridges with the U.S. government. So let's put the climate hoax on ice just for the next 3.5 years. We'll build a bunch of power plants for our data centers, and then we'll get back to using this hoax to enslave humanity again. Same thing with Trump. I think Trump genuinely believes this is a hoax. He says it repeatedly. In fact, he went to the UN General Assembly in September and told world leaders to their face that this was the biggest con job ever perpetrated in human history. And he may be correct. It may be the biggest con job perpetrated in human history, but they are not planning on giving up this hoax. I can assure you. They had 50,000 climate alarmists in the Amazon rainforest, including presidents and prime ministers and kings and potentates and CEOs of big corporations. This is not going anywhere. But they realize that, again, with American adults, you have a problem. They've looked at the polls. American adults don't believe it. And so their solution is actually very simple. We're going to brainwash the next generation. And they said this at the summit. UNESCO, the UN Education Agency, said all governments are required to what they call greening education. They must teach climate literacy. It's going to be on international standardized assessments. And they literally tell you one of the most important parts of fighting climate change is educating the next generation, not just to understand climate change, they said, but to become active, to take action in the fight against climate change. So they're not giving up this hoax any which way. It just has the appearance of that for the next 3.5 years because Trump's in office.
Well, how do you link climate with globalism and controlling people? I mean, I get the climate debate and I get the globalist debate, but I don't get the linkage between them. Can you educate me on that?
Well, climate change is very unique in that it is a global problem that no government can tackle on its own, right? These are the arguments that the UN uses. And it's a ubiquitous problem in that it affects every single thing we do. So if you were a totalitarian and you wanted to control everything on the planet, there's no better hoax that you could come up with than telling people that the gas they exhale is the toxic pollution that needs to be eliminated. And notice they've set the goal of net zero. You've probably heard that term. We got to get to net zero. An average human being exhales about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide every single day that they exist just by breathing, right? So you can never get to net zero unless you eliminate all people. And then you're still not going to get to net zero because all these human bodies are going to be decomposing and releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So it's an unwinnable war. There is literally no way to ever get to net zero, even if you exterminate all the people on the planet. But it's the perfect excuse to take control of everything because your farming is releasing CO2, the methane from your cows. The things that you bought at Walmart came over here on a ship. All of these things need to be taxed and regulated. And their plan eventually, and they've said this and they've outlined this very openly, is to make sure that everybody has their carbon footprint tracked. And everything that you do, as I mentioned, produces CO2. So that dinner you had last night is going to have some amount of CO2 associated with it. That airplane ticket you went to go visit grandma while she was dying, that's going to have some amount of CO2 associated with it. You just put gasoline in your car. Okay, well, let's say now you have met your carbon budget for the month. Now, what do? Well, you got to pay the bankers and the big oil companies and the governments and the UN if you want to be allowed to emit any more. But you don't have any credits left. So now you're in trouble, right? This is the perfect tool for controlling everybody in the world at the most fundamental level. Everything you do produces CO2. And again, this isn't something that just one government can deal with. It's something that takes all the governments. Now, there are several sub-agendas that are working within this broader paradigm. One of the important ones is deindustrializing the West and building up communist China. If you look, for example, at the Paris Agreement, I was at the UN summit in Paris when they came up with this. Barack Obama's running around prancing through the summit like Santa Claus on crystal meth, $1 billion for you, $1 billion for you, and here's another $1 billion for you, and $1 billion for this project. And then he says, we're going to slash American CO2 emissions by, I think it was 30% over the next 10 years. Like, oh, okay. And he had already told us, under my plan, energy prices are necessarily going to skyrocket. Those were almost his exact words. And he wasn't lying, right? He promised all these world governments that he was going to slash American CO2 by 30%. The Communist Chinese show up at the same summit and they say, oh, that's great. Yes, you go ahead and do that. And the Europeans, yeah, you guys do that too. We are going to actually increase our, at least they were honest, we're going to increase our CO2 emissions for at least the next 15 years. They're building about 2 coal-fired power plants on average every week. And then we'll build a bunch of factories to sell you idiots a bunch of solar panels and windmills that our factories obviously will be powered by coal. And you suckers can buy them with tax money. You can mandate them into your energy grid so your energy grids are unreliable. So your businesses will have to shut down. They'll move over to communist China. And suddenly these guys are running around the conference like they just saved the world. If you actually believed that CO2 was pollution, this would be the worst thing imaginable that you could do. Communist China emits 300% more CO2 than the United States already. Every unit of economic production in China results in more than twice as much CO2 as that same unit of economic production would in the United States. So essentially, they're lying. They know they're lying. This is a giant fraud, but it's the perfect fraud because it allows you to undermine the American economy, build up the global political, economic, and religious system, and also micromanage the actions of every person on the planet. It's the perfect excuse, except that it is so fantastical and so ridiculous that a normal person looks at this and says, wait a minute, you're saying the gas I exhale is pollution? And that if I pay you money, in 100 years, the weather's going to be slightly better? Like, that sounds completely and utterly ridiculous. But when you're talking to a kindergartner and the teacher says so, maybe it becomes a little more plausible.
Well, one thing that is true is I believe that I've read that there has been a slight warming of the Earth since about the mid 50s or 60s. I've read a couple of books a year ago, and I had the numbers in my brain. I've now lost them. But is that nature or nurture? Is that because of the just the evolution of the globe, or is it because of our contributing to the carbon footprint?
Well, the planet has always gotten warmer and colder. That's not new at all. In fact, one of the things they're discovering under some of these glaciers that they're shrieking about as they melt a little bit is ancient trees that lived 1,000 years ago when it was much warmer there. So, that's kind of awkward for them. But yes, the planet has always gotten warmer and colder. Right now, it appears to be getting a little tiny bit warmer. There's some very, very good studies on this in various scientific journals produced by a team at the Center for Earth Sciences and Environmental Research, CERES, or Center for Earth Research and Environmental Sciences, I think it is, where they found that of the little bit of observed warming that we've seen over the last 50 or 60 years, most of that, or almost all of that, can be explained by two things. The urban heat island effect, which is basically they put these thermometers out in an open field 100 years ago. Now a city built up around it. There's like a parking lot underneath the thermometer. And so, yes, it gets a little bit warmer, not because there's global warming, but because your thermometer's now in a city. There's, air conditioning, heat vent pouring out heat onto it. So, yeah, it looks a little bit warmer because of that. And then also total solar irradiance. It can explain 100% of the rest of the observed warming. They've taken the data from NASA on solar activity. And what they found was there's been a little bit of increased solar activity, which would naturally cause the planet to warm a little bit. But this is not unusual. The Earth has been far warmer in the past. In fact, 1,000 years ago, Greenland was filled with Vikings who were farming on it. You can't farm anything today on Greenland because it's much too cold. So again, 1,000 years ago, we had a medieval warm period is what they call it. We are still coming out of that little ice age that followed. And so we expect it to get a little bit warmer for the next who knows how many decades. And that'll be nice for humanity. Warmth will be much better for us than cold. And so if CO2 is contributing to this, it's so little as to be negligible. And if CO2 is making it a little tiny bit warmer, that's not even necessarily a bad thing. But human emissions of CO2, I'll just remind people, make up a fraction of a percent of all the greenhouse gases naturally in the atmosphere. And CO2 itself is 0.04% of the atmosphere, with human emissions constituting a tiny, tiny fraction of that. So, I think it's so clearly a fraud that it's frankly amazing to me they've been able to convince people in other countries that this is legit.
So what do you think? How do you relate that to pollution? Do you concern yourself at all with pollution of our air and our water and streams?
Yeah, pollution is a valid concern. And of course, I am something of an environmentalist. I want my children to have clean air and clean water and clean rivers and clean land and clean food. And so I think that's a very real concern. And one of the things that's very obvious when you look out at the world is which are the cleanest countries with the best environments? Well, it's the countries with the most freedom, with the strongest protections for property rights, the countries like the United States. You look out at the world, literally the cleanest countries are Switzerland, New Zealand, Canada, United States of America, Australia, Japan. These are all countries that have free market economies, or at least some semblance of them still. These are all countries that are based, at least loosely, their legal systems are based loosely on biblical principles. These are all countries that have strong protections for private property rights. And if you look at the filthiest, most dirty environments anywhere in the world, you'll find it's all countries that either are run by centrally planned totalitarian regimes or have been in the past when the environment was destroyed. And I think China is Exhibit A. Anybody who's been to China has seen this horrific environment. They do have real pollution. I mean, there are days in their big cities where you can't even go outside. It's so filthy. I grew up in Mexico City in Latin America. It was so filthy. We had days where we couldn't go to school because the air was too toxic to breathe. So those are real concerns. But I want to remind people, CO2 is odorless. It's colorless. It is not pollution. It is plant food. And, CO2 is not a pollution, but there are reasons to be concerned about real pollution, like all the garbage that communist China throws into the ocean, which is totally unacceptable.
Well, you and I are in complete agreement. I'm really happy to hear you say those things because I just don't know climate change. I've had people on this show that are on both sides of the argument. I'm squarely where you are. I do believe that it is not about climate. I think it's about control ultimately. And the thing that there are so many things that concern me about it beyond the obvious, but there's also so much hypocrisy that seems to surround the people who are touting the correction of climate change, like China, as you point out, that are the biggest polluters. I mean, if they really want to affect it, why don't they just clean up their own mess? and that
Right.
would create a much better world for everyone to live in, especially our oceans, as you pointed out, that are littered with plastic, which is really a concern of mine that
Yeah.
I do think we need to address. Um, but then I suspect not one of those people arrived in a rowboat.
Right. No, and that's what we see every year. The fleet of private jets is always clogging up the airports at the exotic destinations where these people have their annual climate summits. They actually chop down hundreds of thousands of trees in virgin protected rainforest to build a new highway for this conference. True story. Obviously, it didn't get finished in time because Brazilian authorities are relatively incompetent. So they chopped down all this forest, didn't even finish the road. But the carbon footprint of these conferences is so massive, it's hard to even calculate. They did brag this year that they had offset all the carbon emissions, I guess, by paying Al Gore's front companies money to go uproot African villages and plant trees there and call it carbon credits. But this is just another scam piled on top of the original scam, right? And what you see with the people who come to these climate summits, these are the uber wealthy of the world. These are government leaders who feast off the backs of taxpayers. These are dictatorships that keep their people in poverty and yet travel around in limousines and private jets and live in mansions. Um, the hypocrisy is just off the charts. And most of the rent-a-mobs, the screeching weirdos with the purple hair, these are spoiled Western kids who grew up with an incredibly nice life, and they fly around the world on airplanes and they eat nice food. And then they come and lecture us about needing to ride our bicycles more. The hypocrisy just reeks, and it is obvious at every one of these summits.
So, who do you think the puppet masters truly are? I mean, someone or a small group usually runs everything. I mean, they're just there's too much to do for all of us to be involved. So, who are the people that are pushing this the most? Do you feel?
Well, I wrote a whole book on this, the Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. I published in 2020. This came out of a lot of the work that I had done for the New American Magazine, which is who I go cover these climate summits for. And I tried to identify the groups that were playing a key role in this process, and there are a lot of them. Some of the ones that I point to, you've got the Council on Foreign Relations here in the United States. You've got the Bilderberg at the international level. You've got the World Economic Forum is obviously a big player in terms of bringing business to the table. You've got a bunch of weird secret societies like Skull and Bones at Yale. You've got the Bohemian Grove out in Northern California. You've got the Royal Institute for International Affairs in the UK. And the first group that I can find that was very prominent that really proposed using this climate hoax as the tool for advancing this global agenda was the Club of Rome. This was a group that was bringing together, old school Soviet communists, people like Mikhail Gorbachev, along with Western globalists, people like Al Gore. And they concluded back in 1991, the Cold War was coming to an end. People were like, all right, well, maybe we don't need all these taxes anymore. Maybe we can shrink the government again since we don't have to worry about the Cold War. And allegedly the Soviet Union was collapsing. And so they said, well, we need a new enemy. And we decided that global warming and environmental problems, that would be perfect because that means the enemy is humanity itself. So this was 1991. The report was called our first global revolution. And I think that's really where this goes back to. They needed a new pretext for micromanaging people's lives and taxing us to death. And the Cold War was no longer going to cut it. So they came up with this idea of global warming. And those are some of the groups that I think are really critical behind it. And what they've done, John, they've set up an incentive system where everybody basically has an incentive to go along with this. They're telling the oil companies, hey, this is a new source of revenue for you, you dummies. Now you can pump some of the CO2 emissions into the ground, get yourself some carbon credits, and make more money. They're telling the bankers, same thing, hey, you could trade these dumb carbon credits. You'll make a fee every time you trade one of these idiot things. So don't worry, your guys are going to make money too. They tell the politicians, hey, this is a way for you to raise more tax revenue. This is a way for you to control people's lives more. And, who ever met a politician that didn't want to control people's lives more? They tell the companies, hey, there's going to be all kinds of profit opportunities for you. They tell the activists, oh, the world is ending. Here you can save the world and be a good human and feel good about yourself by coming to protest global warming. So they've got these incentives in place so that everybody will come along. And they do this on all the key issues, open borders, whatever. But behind the scenes, there is, again, what Trump very properly called the deep state that has been pushing this. And I think once you break that down, yes, these are organizations with addresses. These are people with names and faces, and they need to be called out and exposed.
Well, how do we do it? Because I've been a student of the Kennedy assassination. I just got back from Dallas. I spent 3 days there for the commemoration of President Kennedy's 62nd anniversary of his death. And I talked to many scholars, many historians, many people who actually had direct connections to the assassination, like Lee Harvey Oswald's girlfriend and the granddaughter of the lady who ran the rooming house that Oswald lived in. And I visited J.D. Tippett's, the site of his murder, and the theater where Oswald was arrested. And I've drawn the inescapable conclusion that our own government killed Kennedy, that there is no more information that we need to gather or facts that we need to collect. It is just clear as the nose on your face that Lyndon Johnson orchestrated it, Allen Dulles carried it out, and Hoover covered it up. And so then you look at events that have happened since then, like RFK and MLK, and the collapse of Building 7 in the World Trade Center, the attempt on Trump's life in Butler, Pennsylvania, the death of Charlie Kirk, that is so sketchy it's not even funny. I mean, the cloud of suspicion that is swirling around so many different entities and countries, frankly, as Candace Owens and others have made us aware of, is really disturbing. And oh, I forgot that guy. What was his name? Oh, yeah, Epstein. He's got the fingerprints of the CIA all over what he was doing. So, how do we expose it? And how, I've really come to the conclusion for myself that it's really going to take a revolution of the American people and an uprising to say no more. That this is just not the kind of country we want to live in, and it is not the way that we want our leaders to conduct business on our behalf. Do you see any strategies that we can employ? Because the real problem is, if you just try and do it alone, they'll take you out. They commit murder to silence people.
Yeah, well, that's the $50 million question, and I know we're running up on the clock here, but one of the things that I tell people is you got to start with yourself and your own family. You got to get educated on these issues, and you got to protect your own children. That's been one of my passions for the last 15 years is we've got to stop the indoctrination of our children just on this climate issue. As I mentioned, they're very open about the fact that brainwashing the next generation is the key to moving their agenda forward. And so I always tell people, like, you need to take that seriously, mom and dad. They're talking about weaponizing your child against you and against God and against your country and against your Constitution. And, we cannot tolerate that. That's completely unacceptable. So I tell people it begins with educating yourself, unplugging from the system as much as you can, and retaking charge of your children's education. My last book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools, War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. And this has been endorsed by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and General Michael Flynn and all kinds of great Americans as even a national security issue. Like, we're dumbing down and brainwashing our children to the point where they are not just useless, like they can't even join the military because they're so out of shape, they're so dumbed down, they can't read properly. They're actually being radicalized against us. And we cannot continue to allow this to happen. If they capture the hearts and minds of the next generation, it's all over. And if you go back through history and look at the people who built this system, that was what they built it for, right? It wasn't designed to educate people. It was designed to turn us into dumbed down cogs in the machine. So I think that's really one of the most critical things. We will not win this battle as long as totalitarians are educating our children. It's just not going to happen. And thankfully, that doesn't require, changing any laws. It doesn't require winning any elections. You could just call it the school district right now, depending on what state you live in, and say, look, my son, my daughter, my children are not coming back tomorrow. And, have a nice life, kick rocks, and we're going to be taking charge of our children's education. I think that's huge. I would also encourage people, once you've dealt with protecting your own family, you got to get active. Get active in your local Republican Party. Find out if there's a local chapter of the John Birch Society where you live. There's a lot of different ways that you can get plugged in somehow. And none of us can do everything, but all of us can do a little something. And, sign up for the New American Magazine. It's a great educational tool. You can pass this on to your neighbor. You can pass it on to your mayor, your city councilman, your state legislator. And there is no shortcut ultimately for educating the electorate. We're not going to be able to win this battle as long as the electorate is misinformed.
Final question. We'll let you go. Good stuff, Alex. Thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation last time, and I've enjoyed today immensely. Susie Wiles is in the news this week. She sat for an interview with Vanity Fair. She said that her boss, Donald Trump, had the personality of an alcoholic, that J.D. Vance was a conspiratorialist. And of course, many people who've worked on the 2020 election know that Susie Wiles does not believe or is not willing to admit that 2020 was a stolen election. What's going on with this woman? And what do you think? Is there something below the surface that we're not seeing? This seems to be bizarre behavior. Now, I know the media cherry picked things that she said. I know they reshaped them in a way that she probably didn't intend. But at worst, you'd have to concede that she gave them the bait, she gave them the fodder. What do you make of all of it?
Yeah, I've been suspicious of Susie Wiles from the very beginning, and I've said that publicly.
You and me both. She's not a nice person, and I know it firsthand. I know
Really?
she's not a truthful person. We'll start
Wow.
there. I know for a fact that she is an untruthful person.
Yeah, and that's
So
always really dangerous. Not being honest is a very serious character flaw. And she's got a history of working for some of the very companies and entities that brought us to this point. I mean, she was working as a lobbyist for a company that was representing Pfizer, the company that brought us the COVID madness just recently. So, I'm skeptical, and I'm skeptical of quite a few people working in the administration, other than Susie. You've got the Treasury Secretary Besant. You've got Howard Lutnick over at the U.S. Department of Commerce. There's quite a few people that I think need to be put under a microscope. So we'll see. My guess is, like you said, the fake media probably, the Vanity Fair reporter probably cherry picked this in a way to create a narrative. But obviously, there's something there. I don't think the reporter would have invented all this from whole cloth. My guess is the reporter probably has recordings of some of these conversations, because you wouldn't just go out and publish them if you weren't sure.
I've given Besant, Lutnick, and others a free pass because I do feel like they're working hard, and I don't object to things that they are saying. Now, I know that Besant worked for Soros at one point earlier in his career, but a lot of people work for Soros. So I don't automatically label him or brand him because he had that experience in his career. It seems to me that they're doing a pretty good job on every front relative to the economy, except serious budget discipline. We'll come back and talk about that at a later time. But it really was curious to me that Susie Wiles was upset that Elon Musk came in with a hatchet and got rid of USAID, that she thought that was a bad thing. I mean, does this signal the beginning of the end for her in the Trump administration? Or is it just a speed bump that will be yesterday's news in a week or two?
We'll have to see. I mean, Trump and Vance have both come out publicly and defended her, so we'll see, whether that holds. But I hope he does take a closer look at her and decide whether that's really who he wants as one of his top people. So,
well, thank you, Alex Newman. It's been a great conversation. You are the author of The Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, and Crimes of the Educators, all available on Amazon and I'm sure other spots. Where can people follow you, and how do we keep up with you?
Well, thank you very much, John. So my personal website is libertysentinel.org. People can get signed copies of all our books there, libertysentinel.org. We've got a newsletter that we put out for free also. And then all of our climate stuff, that's over at thenewamerican.com. I encourage people, if you're not signed up for the magazine yet, get a subscription. Maybe a good starting point. We've got the daily headlines that we put out for free. Just go to thenewamerican.com. Really, really good resource to stay up to speed on what's going on in the world. I serve as a senior fellow at Classical Conversations, the nation's largest homeschooling program. So I encourage people to check that out if they've got school-aged children. And then you can find me on X, Alex Newman _JOU, and New American Mag. So I hope people will follow us in all those ways. And John, thank you very much for having me on the program. It's an honor and a pleasure.
That's our pleasure. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and happy holidays, a safe, healthy, prosperous new year. And that is the truth. And I'm John Gordon. Thank you, Alex Newman.
Thank you so much, John. God bless.